Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the New York Times Climate Hub. And thank you for braving the wee smear, as they say in Glasgow, which means light, persistent drizzle. That's for all of you online. So I think this is a perfect environment to discuss looking around, building nature-based solutions. This discussion is also not going to be witnessed by you and all of you online, but it's going to be witnessed by our conference of trees that are surrounding you here. Today, we have a fantastic panel, and I'm really grateful to HSBC for supporting this event today. And I'm delighted to invite on stage Nicolas Moreau, who is the CEO of HSBC Asset Management. So please give him a warm welcome. Nicolas.
Hello and welcome to the New York Times Climate Hub. My name is Nicolas Moreau, and I am the CEO of HSBC Asset Management. So this morning panel is about building nature-based solutions. So why are you listening to a banker to introduce this session? And I can tell you, you're immediately thinking. The answer is that the financial sector has taken conscience lately of nature as an asset. So I've got a few figures just to illustrate that. It is estimated that over 40 trillion of economic value generation, more than half of the world output, is dependent on nature. Yet, around a fifth of countries are at risk of their ecosystem collapsing. An estimated 8 trillion of investment in nature is required between now and 2050 to tackle the climate, biodiversity, and land degradation crisis. That means that roughly 130 billion per annum are needed to be invested in nature. So, of course, doing the right thing can't be the only selling point. There's an immense opportunity for investors in rising value being assigned to nature as an asset, and all the services they deliver, which are critical to mitigating climate change, in addition to providing almost everything we need to survive and thrive. So what are we doing as an investors? We are looking at the problem in two ways. The first one is how can we preserve biodiversity? How can we integrate the biodiversity risk in the way we manage our portfolio, in the way we invest? And second, we are investing in nature. The first subject is one of the most complex we've got to do, because biodiversity is very difficult to measure when you look at the impact on a company and the risk that comes with it. So, for example, we are engaging with companies in the food industry. We are encouraging companies to ensure supply chain management, particularly looking at end farmers and operating in a biodiversity positive manner, which over time should enhance farmland resilience to weather events brought on by climate change. On top of it, we report, we share experience with our fellow investors to try to progress and go in the right direction. We also invest in nature. We created last year a joint venture with a company called Pollination, which is proposing nature-based solution to investors. We believe in the emergence of natural capital as an asset class, and through this investment, we believe that we can restore biodiversity and as well providing financial returns to our investors. A great irony in finance is that the world's oldest and most important asset class is also the least understood. That's why I am delighted to introduce three amazing panelists. We will ensure we all leave the room experts on nature-based solutions. First one is Marcelo Bear. He is the Vice President of Sustainability and Group Affairs for Natura & Co. He has worked in many NGOs as a journalist, as well as Chief of Staff at the Brazilian Ministry of Justice. He was also Vice Minister in the country's Ministry of Strategic Affairs. Natura & Co. is a founding member of Transform to Net Zero, a cross-sector initiative to accelerate the transition to a net zero economy. We have also Kaime Silvestre, a climate activist and human rights lawyer advocating for humanitarian action and for protection of rainforests, its wildlife and the people who depend on it. He is also part of Generation Climate Initiative. Finally, we are lucky to have Paul Fonzin, who was Executive Secretary of South Africa's Post-Apartheid Truth and Reconciliation Commission and co-founded the International Center for Transitional Justice, an organization that works over 40 countries that have endured massive human rights violations. Please join me in welcoming our three panelists this morning. Thank you.
I'm coming to you again, so I think you're done. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Fantastic. So the title of this session is Look Around, Building Nature-Based Solutions. And I think we should take a moment to look around, because we are in an extraordinary space. This is a living conference hall. The artist Ez Devlin has brought 197 trees and plants to this space, representing the 197 countries that are taking a role in COP. It's an extraordinary room to be in, and a big contrast to the Blue Zone, which I'm sure you've all been in this week. And I want to assure people who are watching from home that it smells as beautiful as it looks, does it not? So panel, we are gathered in the Conference of Trees, and our goal, our mission, is to discuss how nature can help us to address the climate and the biodiversity crises. We need solutions that can scale and can be quick, but we also need solutions that can further deepen and not threaten human dignity and well-being. It's no small challenge. So I'm delighted that this panel is as intersectional as it is. I think it's important that we bring together perspectives from different communities. And here we have the voice of business, the voice of science, Indigenous leadership, and youth. So we're going to be addressing this issue and hearing their ideas from all of those different perspectives. So the way it's going to work, it's a short panel, it's 45 minutes. I've already burnt up a few of those minutes already. We're going to have a discussion here for half an hour, and then we're going over to you for your questions. And if you're watching remotely, you can also submit your questions, so please do, and they will be fed up here and incorporated in our conversation. So I'm going to begin by asking each of you just to sort of lay out the basics of why, from your point of view, for your community, nature-based solutions are so important. And I want to start with hearing about that from the youth community. And I know you had introductions a second ago, but I just want to underscore that, Kaime, you were born in the Amazon, and you are a leading Brazilian youth activist. You were an advisor to the first UN Youth Climate Summit. We thank you for that role and for that work, and we also respect the fact that you're now also studying law in pursuit of your goals. So anyway, welcome to the Conference of Trees, and tell us, from the youth point of view, why are nature-based solutions so important?
So thank you. Well, from the youth perspective, first, as a climate activist, I must say that the best solution ever is the drastic reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. But also, we need to enhance the biodiversity protection, and also we need a real restoration, a real process of restoration of our ecosystems. But that's very complicated. That's not easy and should be the last of our options. I always say that there are real solutions and there are false solutions. And it's complicated sometimes to identify which one is the real and which one is the false solutions. For example, of false solutions that have been promoted, we can mention the simply commercial tree plantings on monocultures, and also the bioenergy. They are not nature-based solutions because they had big impacts on people's life, on communities, and should be avoided.
You are running ahead of me into all the big topics of this discussion. But just to get back to that first point, I mean, the youth are calling for nature-based solutions because they want to see what we have protected, and then ultimately they want to see some of what is lost restored, correct? They want to live in a world, where they can enjoy nature.
No, yes, and we young people, we are half of the world's population. So of course we are interested in the protection of our planet, of our biodiversity, but one point also we must highlight that although we are half of world's population, we are not taking decisions about our planet. So that's very sad. That's why we are fighting for. That's why we are doing demonstrations. We are doing protests every week because we need youth engaged in the decision-making process. We need to sit on the table, and that's not happening. It's all the same. It's white, old men, rich men taking decisions about our futures, and that's very sad, and we are fighting for it.
Right, well, we'll try and get you to the table. For now, we have you on the sofa, but we agree you should be at the table. Sylvia, Dr. Sylvia, again, you were introduced earlier, but I just wanted to underscore, because you are a world expert on important things like fungus and algae, which, once you get down to the detail of this, and nature-based solutions are going to need this kind of expertise. And of course, you are at the Natural History Museum. From the point of view of the scientific community, why are nature-based solutions so important?
Well, they are at the base of what we can do now to, really get to a planet where both people and the planet can thrive together. So in the last century, humanity has reached great things, but at great cost for nature. And then I think we arrive now at the point where we see that the way to move forward is really in a sustainable way, where both people and planet can thrive. So as a scientist at the Natural History Museum, we have 80 million objects in our collections that capture all the natural worlds, and we can really start understanding biodiversity and how this has changed through time and space. And this is fundamental, because in order to find solutions from nature, you really need to understand nature. You need to understand what goes on in nature and all the multitude of interactions. So you have to really take a holistic approach. And that's where I think for us scientists provide knowledge-based solution really to tackle the
And we're going to be
challenges.
asking you to share some of your work with us in a minute. Presumably, though, it's a good time to be a botanist. I mean, the climate crisis, for a long time, when we would hear about scientists, we would think about, those studying the Arctic, and we would think about those working on energy. But it's a good time to be a botanist, right?
Absolutely. And if you think, of carbon, we are all talking about carbon. I mean, forests are a wonderful natural solution, to tackle these major problems. And we are surrounded by trees here, so I think it's really a poignant, beautiful place to be. But I will add again, and I sort of drive towards my research, we have to look and understand what goes on. So now here we see beautiful trees, but a lot of people don't think about what goes beneath, what happens below ground, and that's where, the plant-fungi interactions, and interactions are everywhere. No organism exists in isolation. So really, truly understand how nature works.
Brilliant, thank you. Marcelo, you're with Natura and Company, and I'm not sure how familiar people might be with the company. You're one of the largest global, you described it perhaps as a cosmetics or as a beauty company. Lots of brands come under that umbrella, including Body Shop, which I think is a very familiar brand to lots of people in the UK who understand what the values were that Anita Roddick brought to that. And that's very much where Natura is located. You're one of the most ethical brands in the world, and you're also a B Corp. So I just wanted to put that out there because obviously the role of business and in this movement is complex and involves lots of different kinds of actors. But from a business point of view, as a businessman, and you're the Vice President of Sustainability there, why are nature-based solutions important to business?
Because business are in planet Earth, and it should be taken into account the connection that business have with the planet boundaries. So I think for Natura, which is a Brazilian company that was founded 50 years ago, a very similar moment as this one that we're living now happened in '92 when we had the Earth Conference in Rio de Janeiro, and a rise of consciousness of what was happening in the Amazon was super important for the business to shift itself and to start producing using the ingredients of biodiversity and the knowledge and connection of traditional communities. So one thing could relate to the other, the social, the environmental, and the economic angle. I think the way of producing that connects the three spheres and the three lenses has been put in place in Natura for the last 20 years, and we understood that nowadays the connection between carbon, climate, and nature must be rebuilt. So everything that has been discussed here during COP is something that we should connect to nature-based solutions and to help us to stop deforestation and to prevent the tropical forests from being chopped down, because we will only reach the targets that we are all aiming for as a business perspective, as mankind, if those targets are connected. So that's what Natura has been working for, trying to operate in the Amazon in a very close connection with the region and with the communities. Nowadays protecting around 2 million hectares, which is far from good. We need many others to practice business in a way that it's more connected to nature-based solutions, so that can become something that will move the needle and will help us to move away from where we are heading to.
Good. Thank you. And Jade Begay, thank you for joining this panel at short notice. We really appreciate you leaving other work to be with us. Jade is a Dene woman from the southwest of Turtle Island, and she is with NDN Collective, the climate justice campaign director there. And she's also on the board of Amazon Watch, so there is a big Amazon connection here. And of course, you've just joined the White House's first Environmental Justice Advisory Board, so congratulations on that role too. So speaking from the Indigenous climate movement's perspective, why are nature-based solutions important?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I want to do a little bit of a reframe, and I'll just say off the bat, I think I'll hold the role of the renegade in this conversation. But so I'm coming from the perspective of Indigenous rights activists, Indigenous climate activists, and the reframe I want to lift up is that what we're hearing today in a lot of these spaces here at COP, what we're hearing from big companies around nature-based solutions is sort of a co-optation of our traditional knowledge. So I'm participating in COP I've been participating over the past week, will be participating next week, and my specific work there has been with the local communities and Indigenous peoples platform. And within that platform, which is an official forum within the UNFCCC, we've been advocating to reclaim our nature-based solutions, right? To really center traditional ecological knowledge or Indigenous ecological knowledge at the core of nature-based solutions, because that's what we know to be the solutions for climate change. Like I said, there's a kind of co-optation happening, and we want to be able to push back against that and say that these models, these business models, are just a perpetuation of really harmful tactics that have been used to take land or to have land grabs and to displace our people, for industry to be able to carry on as business as usual and to operate as business as usual. So what we're calling for this week and next week is fighting against false solutions, as my colleague here was saying.
You're the renegade sofa.
Yes, here we are in solidarity. So we're pushing against false solutions in Article 6, and we're promoting Indigenous sovereignty, Indigenous rights to be at the core of so-called nature-based solutions, and to uplift frameworks like UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration of Rights on Indigenous Peoples, to uplift the framework of FPIC, which is free, prior, and informed consent. Those have to be the baseline when we're talking about nature-based solutions. Otherwise, we're leaning into these patterns, these behaviors, these systems that have, again, just harmed indigenous peoples. So I just want to start there.
No, I totally hear that.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, it's been the Indigenous voice that have led us to nature-based solutions.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, the key questions, who owns, who decides, who benefits? Because
Right.
actually, in whose control will these solutions be, and will they deliver justice? It's not enough that the nature-based solutions, it has to have all of those other elements included. I
Right.
completely agree.
Right.
And let's keep bringing that back into the conversation. So let's begin to explore some of the potential solutions as we see them. And obviously, you've begun to put on the table the idea of indigenous land rights, and we'll come back to that as a nature-based solution in itself.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to start first by hearing a bit more about your work, because I feel like what you're saying is that we're perhaps playing a little catch-up. Nature-based solutions need to be based in a much deeper understanding of what nature can do and how it works. Do you want to speak about the work that you're doing and the kind of possibility that might open up for a different order of nature-based solutioning?
Yeah, I think what I do with my work is exactly a very good example of trying to understand more what's going on in nature, as I was saying earlier, to find solutions for nature and from nature. So I'm fascinated. I'm a botanist, so I love plants. But what really intrigues me about plants is how they interact with the environment, and that is through this partnership with soil fungi. So not many people, they're, as I say, below ground, out of mind, but really like the way, it's a wonderful partnership that has been going on for 400 million years. So we can really learn from what nature has been doing, And the problem is that the way we've been exploiting nature so far has had a huge impact on this partnership. Mm-hmm. This is an example, one of many. And therefore, by harming through intensive farming, for example, overuse of chemical fertilizers, deforestations indeed, we are destroying these partnerships that are fundamental to the functioning of ecosystems and carbon storage and so forth. So it is being a vicious circle, but now what we are trying to do is turn it into a virtuous circle. So if you understand how this partnership works, you can start really thinking of nature-based solutions. Okay, can we diminish our reliance on chemical fertilizers by actually starting reintroducing these partnerships into soils, into degraded soils, both agricultural, or if you're thinking about reforestation, you have to take an holistic approach. It's very well to plant a tree, but you have to see how the tree fits holistically into the whole ecosystem, how the fungi, what tree are you planting? So that's really where my research is. I'm really trying to understand the diversity of these interactions, how they work, and then say, okay, now let's move and look at solutions.
Yeah. The goal of moving on from agricultural reliance on fertilizer is a huge one.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so there's you. You presumably don't work in a lab, you work out in the environment.
Both, actually.
Both?
Yes.
So there's you doing that work, and then here's the global agro, business. How does your work get filtered up, get turned into solutions and kind of like, or is that something that's outside of your scope? Do you have a sense about how the work that you're doing can be multiplied up into solutions to have that kind of impact?
Absolutely. I think it's very much down to communication, and there is a desire, like Marcelo was saying, the industry, the agricultural sectors. I think everybody is aware, actually, that we need to find these nature-based solutions to different levels. So I think the important thing is to keep the communication going. So at this moment, I'm more doing work really to understand the diversity, leading then to these solutions. But the agriculture industry will be very much part, of finding these solutions, because ultimately you have to have people on board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jade, I'm kind of curious, how do we understand how Indigenous science and Western science can work together, because I think most people who are super interested in this area might be aware that there's been huge leaps and bounds in Western science's understanding of trees, tree communication, mycelium networks, and that's all happened really over the last kind of like the last decade. It feels like it's been a kind of, well, maybe even shorter, a huge kind of leap forward in understanding. But that must be somewhat frustrating for Indigenous communities who are like, oh, you guys finally figured out that trees talk to each other, like, congrats. So what's your sort of feeling about how we can, as we seek the solutions, how we can bring together these different approaches?
Yeah, this is a great question. We say in our work all the time that Indigenous peoples are the first climate scientists. We're the first environmentalists. And yeah, I think this goes back to what I was mentioning earlier around this concept of traditional ecological knowledge, or Indigenous ecological knowledge being at the core of this work. We're really at this precipice of trying to figure it out. You know, the video before, how do we solve this problem? And our nature-based nature-based solutions are the way, but we cannot confuse Indigenous peoples' nature-based solutions with business models that allow corporations, governments to continue to pollute, continue to extract resources, fossil fuels from the ground, namely. Sorry, I'm having a little issue here. So yeah, I think there's some really good examples. I don't know if we want to get into examples just yet, but NDN Collective, my organization, you mentioned me being on the board of Amazon Watch. I also sit on the board of an organization called Native Conservancy, not to be confused with the Nature Conservancy. Native Conservancy is about conservation on Indigenous terms. And so this organization is based in Alaska, Southeast Alaska, and the organization I lead the climate work at NDN Collective, we've recently joined a partnership, and we're supporting Native Conservancy, who are led by the Eyak people of this region in Alaska, and we're helping them invest. So one thing I forgot to mention, or just maybe have not mentioned, is that NDN Collective is a 7 legal entity organization. So we're not just a nonprofit doing advocacy and campaign work. We're doing impact investing, we're doing for-profit business investment, but it's all rooted in our tenets of honoring Indigenous rights, honoring Indigenous knowledge, and so yes, so we are working with Native Conservancy, investing in this ecosystem model to generate this local economy that is rooted in their traditional knowledge. So they are kelp farmers. They're kelp farmers through their ancestral lineage. They are also fishers through their ancestral lineage. So we're investing in kelp nurseries, working with scientists and researchers, and just an array of amazing people who are really knowledgeable about kelp. And this one product, this one beautiful creature in the sea has the potential to be food, nutrient-dense food. It has the potential to sequester carbon and clean the ocean, become a biofuel. There's all these things, and we can create a localized economy around that. And while we're doing that, we're supporting their fishing industry by investing in what they need to have a self-sustaining fishing industry or fishing business that then is able to promote food sovereignty for these people. So this is one of what we are calling nature-based solutions, but again, just flipping the language a bit, because there's so many buzzwords in the climate space that can lead us to think that these are the right way. But again, just reclaiming that these are our nature-based solutions, and another term we're using for these types of models is, again, these regenerative local economy models that are led by Indigenous peoples.
Thank you, Jade.
Yeah.
I want to bring in Marcelo now because obviously, I mean, you've just heard what Jade said, and I'm sure that might riff with some of the work that you're doing at Natura, but you're also working at, you know, terrific scale. So I'm kind of would love to hear some of the things that you're doing, and also how we balance this tension of this work to be effective, needing to be super kind of like local and sort of respecting of the specifics of locality, and how you match that with the scale that you guys need to achieve.
Yeah. This is super important, and I think Jade is right. We have to take into account the knowledge and the expertise and everything that traditional communities have been operating with nature-based solutions for thousands of years. So the Amazon is, just to give an example, we know well, it's been populated for over 20,000 years. It's probably the biggest garden on Earth, and it has been managed super well until recently, when we start to deforestate, and now 390 billion trees are suffering. We have, only this year, 400 million trees were chopped down, and 30 million people that live there are living under the poverty line. So many problems that we must tackle with public policy, but also with business trying to build wealth and to build a different model. And we do think that there is a possibility to build a model in which you can have not only consideration, and you can operate with traditional communities, sourcing in a way that is ethical, but also paying for the traditional knowledge, building the relationship that recognize their importance. So this is super important for us. We think that that's the way to move into the future, and also something that will connect carbon and nature bases. I think the economic sector was accurate when everyone started to build from the NDCs how to get in more carbon neutrality. We are far from doing that on nature and on the social angle. We still have a lot to build to get metrics and to get clarity on targets. So we are starting to see some new things coming. And I think just to give you an example of a practice that is super practical, that helped a lot to build on those 3 dimensions, we operate with one of the communities in the Amazon where a tree was on the verge of extinction. It was called the Upuba tree. And its wood was used for broomsticks and roofs and other uses. And the community came to us and said, listen, can you, by science, understand what can we do with the fruits of the tree? And we studied it for a couple of years, and we understood that it would be possible to build a whole new line of products out of the half of the fruits of that tree, and we would pay 3 times more per tree per year than what the community would have for the wood. So the community immediately shifted from chopping it down to plant the tree again. So that's a very practical model of regeneration that I think we'll see more and more, and must become the new normal for companies to operate in a way that they consider all the dimensions that are important to have what nature-based solutions should really mean, and not just a buzzword, but a practice. I think that's what we are aiming for.
And Kaime, I'm going to bring you back in now to expand a bit on the full solutions. Last night, in preparing for this panel, I watched a lovely video on the Shell website about their commitment to nature-based solutions. And what I saw really was this is tree washing. This is just trying to offset the carbon in the rest of their operations by buying up forest. Can you expand a little bit more on how we see not all the corporations, and obviously Natura and company are a very different kind of corporation, but can you expand a bit more about what it is we need to be aware is happening out there that we should not allow within the nature-based solution frame?
So we've seen in the last year forest fires all over the world, not only in tropical countries, for example, where I live, where I come from, the Amazon region. So we've seen records, we have records of fires all over the Amazon. And that's terrible for our planet, because if we say that we want to change the world, that we are promoting solutions, nature-based solutions, but we can't even protect our forests. So how can we achieve these goals, net zero or whatever, if we can protect our basic biodiversity, which is our forests? So we can see like lots of beautiful speeches for corporations, but in fact, we can see it's just there. Fires in Siberia, in Australia, and in Brazil, and we are And we see we are losing our biodiversity, and we need to act urgently about that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of excitement around the idea of planting trees, but as you say, actually protecting the trees we already have has to be the first priority, right?
Yes.
Now it's your opportunity to contribute to this and to ask questions of the panel. We have somebody here with their hand up. We could get a mic there. Yeah, please introduce yourself so we know. Yeah. Oh, keep going, I'm sure.
Hi there, sorry. Beth Scott, a professor of ecology at the University of Aberdeen. So my question is very similar to what Jade has brought up, but from an ecological scientist perspective, not an indigenous perspective. And what I've seen is that the financial institutes seem to only worry about financial risk in the sense that it's risking their financial assets. They don't really worry about the ecology. And also this sense that finance is somehow a higher calling than all the rest of us. And so my question is more about, to do this well and to do it rapidly, how do we get the finance and all of the business world to really start to think about how the ecology really does work? How do we get them to work with us, come off their pedestal, and because I think that's the only way we're going to go rapidly, but I really don't know how to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, we certainly need a lot more investment going into nature-based solutions. We need it to be valued, but as you say, sometimes the pricing can create other kinds of incentives. Who'd like to comment on that?
Can I? Please.
Marcelo and then Jade.
You first.
Thank you, Jade. So, very good question, of course. I think I'll give two answers. I think there is one new perspective that is rising that connects nature with risks and finance, which is TNFD, so the Task Force for Nature Disclosure. So finance wants to know how much exposure you have on risk on nature, which is not enough, but it's a very good start. So to start specifying, and for companies and corporations and finance to at least create a new dialogue around it, and to start putting that into score accounts, into frameworks, so they can understand where the problem relies. Not enough because it only measures the risk. It doesn't yet measures the opportunities and the necessity and the need to do it rapidly and to start regenerating, which I think is the second part of the answer, which would be to strengthen CBD, so the Conference of Biodiversity, where communities, science, and corporations are putting together something as we did for the NDCs on climate, so to have each country to know where it should go in terms of carbon emissions, to do the same for nature. So to know how much of nature has each territory loss, and how can we use the knowledge, the traditional knowledge, and benefit from the culture that traditional people have with the benefit of science to foster and to run with projects that can regenerate. I think that's probably my answer to the question. Please, Jade.
Thank you. Jade.
Yeah, I think it's a very complex question because it requires a multi-pronged approach, and I appreciate the business side of it. I'm going to speak to the way that we move investments into our communities. So I mentioned Andean Collective being this collective of 7 legal entities. One of our arms just does philanthropic and grant-making work. So we organize within philanthropy, and I don't know if any of you know, but it's 0.4% of all philanthropic dollars go to Indigenous communities. And when we do the math and we think about 80% of biodiversity being protected by Indigenous peoples, yet just this smidgen of the resources go to our communities, it doesn't make sense on how we can protect all of this biodiversity. We need more resources. We need the floodgates really opened. And so that's what my organization, or the organization I work with, Andean Collective, does. So, for example, we are one of the only Indigenous groups that received the Bezos Earth Fund in the past year. And while we're grateful for that investment, while that investment is a game changer for us in being able to then reshare those resources with our communities and invest in Native Conservancy and this kelp model, or invest in this. We just co-launched a buffalo sanctuary, which is also a regenerative business model, local, place-based. We want to make sure that next year, when that fund is, or the next cycle rather, when that fund is opened again, that they're giving 10 investments to 10 Indigenous communities and organizations. So I think it also requires us to be actively brought into these boardrooms, in these panels, to speak to investors, to speak to philanthropy, to speak to financial institutions, to invest in us and trust us. We need unrestricted dollars flowing into our communities so we can uplift, again, our nature-based solutions.
I mean, it's worth us remembering and always restating that, of course, you know, Indigenous people are already protecting 80% of the world's diversity. So in a way, we have a nature-based solution that's already working.
Right,
it's just very underinvested.
Yeah, I think Elon Musk tweeted last year, like, I am ready to invest in the most quick and fast solution to carbon sequestering, and everyone's responses were, that's trees and Indigenous peoples.
Thank you. Do we have other questions? Yes, thank you.
Hi, I'm Amalia from Brazil. When we talk about companies and governments doing greenwashing, while that's happening, a lot worse is being pushed by those parties. Like, for example, my government from Brazil is allied with agribusiness and with the people that are, you know, deforesting the Amazon and so many forests in our country. So my question is, how can nature-based solutions be pushed through when Indigenous communities, the ones that we should be listening to all the time, are having to deal with so many other challenges, social insecurity, and, you know, just the threat of a logger coming? And is there a way that business can, you know, have an influence, a positive influence in that? How can, you know, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to take that first?
Yes. Thank you, Amalia. I always say that if you want changes, first we need to give power to people who can make the changes. So if we give power for leaders who don't care about the climate, about the environment, about biodiversity, we won't get any good result from them. So it's very important that we must actually elect candidates that care about the climate, care about the environment. Otherwise, what's happening in the world? Many countries in the world are electing deniers. So of course they will not develop climate policies, biodiversity policies. So I think, yes, we need people with power, but people with power who care about the planet, care about the people.
Thank you. And Marcelo, I have to come to you because, of course, you know, the head of your company, you know, it's a Brazilian-based company, that wasn't clear at the beginning, you know, did speak out, criticizing Bolsonaro for the deforestation, which, you know, is a politically risky thing to do. So it was, must have been some discussion inside the company before a decision that was made. But yeah, please.
So thank you so much for the question, Amalia. And as Brazilians, and we are super concerned about deforestation, but being concerned is not enough. So what we did was we brought the best of science, so the ones that are, all the NGOs that are working with deforestation, with satellites, to bring together a new portal where we can understand what's going on, why it's going on, and how to tackle that. And we launched last month a new portal that's called plenamata.eco, where you have accurate information on deforestation and on the reasons of deforestation. And we are delivering the results that we deliver as a group, not only the business results, but also the nature results on the Amazon, quarterly now to understand, to track, and to have the dialogue with the companies that are somehow, if not responsible, that can help putting the situation down. Because, you know, if we tackle deforestation, Brazil can actually become carbon neutral by 2030. Deforestation is our main offender, and what happens to the Amazon will be what happens to the Paris Agreement as a whole. Without the Amazon, there is no Paris Agreement, and without the Paris Agreement, there is no Amazon, because if temperatures rise as well, fires will intensify, etc. So, super worried as well. I think now is the moment for us to come together and to bring a big alliance to stop deforestation by 25 at most. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I really admire Natura because I know Natura for a while, and I know your sense of social responsibility. I really wish that all companies also had this sense of responsibility, social responsibility. That's very important.
Thank you.
And if I may add one thing, when it comes to how do we get it right, I think we definitely need to be speaking with business, but we also need, and you know, we're here at the COP, we need to be working at the governmental level and ensure that equity is a part of all climate policy. So I just want to highlight that the US is in this big political battle to pass the Build Back Better Act, and also we're building a program called Justice 40, which would, the goal is to take 40% of all clean energy investments and benefits and put it back into, well, it will be indigenous communities, but all communities who have been hit the hardest by environmental injustice. So my role on the WEJAC, the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, is to ensure that all the agencies in the US government are working alongside Justice 40, are implementing or working with Justice 40 in their program work, and that people like myself and my colleagues are advising all of these agencies to uplift environmental justice, to work with this baseline of equity so that we're not perpetuating, you know, past harms that have happened. So also just wanting to say that business, philanthropy, NGOs cannot just solve the climate crisis on our own. We need government to be responsible and government to take accountability too.
Thank you. We're out of time, but I want to give the last comment to our botanist.
Well, a very brief comment, but which is not really about botany, but I would say just to add to that, I think also the public, you know, we talk about government and we talk about companies, but it's really informing everyone, you know. Like for instance, at the museum, we do science, we have beautiful collections, but we also reach out to the public and really ultimately to tackle these problems of politicians and, you know, some companies not doing as well as you guys are doing, is really to inform the public and let the public become advocate for the planet. Everybody can put pressure on companies and governments to embrace more solution, you know, nature-based solution. Really.
And we are part of nature.
Exactly.
So
yes.
Our advocacy is a nature-based solution.
So
perhaps.
we should all be advocates. Yeah.
It should become mainstream, right?
Yeah, it should be mainstream.
I need to wrap it up. We're out of time. Thank you for joining me in the Conference of Trees. Thank you for joining us. Please give this amazing panel a round of applause.